Hi, everybody. San Diego Media Pros, thanks for joining us. It was good to see you all at the other day's screening of Her Name Was Moviola, starring Walter Murch. Unsung hero in the film, assistant editor and editor Dan Farrell, who joins us today. Also joined by Media Pros members Eric Addison and Rob Esposito. We just wanted to sort of chat with Dan and get some insight on the industry and his journey, and then the film and working with Walter and all the things. And Dan, I wanted to open it up. If you would kind of start at the beginning, how did you get into film editing and how did you come to meet Walter?
I started in film editing. Initially, I wanted to be a cameraman. I was 17 years old, and I knew I wanted to work in the film business. And I thought, it was my mother who said to me, "What about being a cameraman, darling?" I thought, that's good. I could travel everywhere and meet film stars and be right up close. So I was 17 years old, and I was walking the streets of Soho looking for a job in the film industry. And I just happened to knock on the door of this editing company. And I said, "Look, are you looking for any runners?" And they said, "Sure, it just so happens we're looking for someone. The money's terrible." I said, "I don't care. I just want to get my foot in the door." I didn't know what editing was, And so I worked at this company for 3 years and suddenly realized that actually editing was, in my view, going to be far more exciting than any other department of the film industry, because I just saw the power of post-production and how things can change so dramatically and how you can just make people think stuff. And after 3 years of doing that as a permanent employee, I decided very recklessly to go freelance. I got a job offer on a film. Somebody said, "Oh, Dan, do you fancy coming to work on this thing as a second assistant?" And I did that. And then from that, I went on to another film, until 1984 came along. And there was this film called Return to Oz that was going on. And at the same time, there was a Tom Cruise film, Legend. I think it was Tom Cruise. Was that Legend?
Yes.
Yeah. Ridley Scott.
That's it, Ridley Scott. So I was offered a job on Legend, and I took the second assistant's role. And I said, "Look, before I start, just to let you know, guys, I'm going to go on holiday." So I went to Thailand and had my 21st birthday in a go-go bar, which was fantastic fun. And while I was out there, I got a call one day to say that. I can't remember who called me up. Somebody called me up to say, "Oh, Dan, are you looking for a second assistant's job?" And I said, "Oh, so I've got one. I'm going to be working on a film called Legend by some bloke called Ridley Scott is going to direct it." And they said, "Oh, no." He said, "That's gone to this other bloke called Dave." So I said, No, that's my job." He said, No, he's left a film called Return to Oz to go on to Legend. And do you want to replace this guy? And I said, "Hang on a second. He's taken my job." Anyway, so I said, "I'll take the Return to Oz job, whatever the hell that is." And I had no idea about Walter Murch. I didn't know who he was. And I started, and he was just this American director with an incredibly deep voice like this and a fantastic moustache. And I was terrified of him because he was so powerful and I was such an underling. But he was so incredibly gracious to absolutely everybody on the set. He remembered everybody's name. And he talked to you just like you were on an equal. And so that was my first, and I was on that film for 18 months or something like that. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it went on and on and on. But where I really cracked it with Walter is, because I've questioned myself about this. I thought, why does Walter keep employing me? And I thought, because there's no way I can compete on his intellectual level, that's for sure. And also his artistic level. I mean, it's off the charts, But I did make him laugh. I used to make him laugh. And I remember one day I made him a cup of tea when I was on Return to Oz. And I walked up to him and I said, "Here's your cup of tea, Walter." And he said, "Do that again?" And I went, "Red as a beetroot." And I went, "Here's your cup of tea." And he said, "Do you want to be the voice of a gnome?" And there are gnomes in Return to Oz in the film that come out of the rocks and attack Dorothy as she's trying to, and the Gnome King. They all hit the Gnome King's underlings. They all had voices, and within about half an hour, I was over in the re-recording room doing voices of a gnome in this deep, gravelly voice. And I think that's probably where I really cracked it with him. He thought, "This guy's good," So that's how I met him.
I had a chance to meet Walter when he came to. So I went to film school at San Diego State University here in San Diego, and he came about a year after I graduated, and somebody had said, "Oh, and I'd read the book in the blink of an eye, and I met him afterwards and spoke to him, and he gave an amazing talk, and I went up to him, and he was the nicest, friendliest guy, and
Yeah.
but there was two things that stuck with me about that talk. He talked about two different types of filmmakers. One that was more, and your imitation of him, by the way, is brilliant. Oh, dead on. Out of nowhere.
40 years, so it should be good.
But he talked about two different types of filmmakers, and he said, there's one filmmaker that's like, Francis, that's much more collaborative, and then there's other filmmakers that if you offered them a box and you could plug it up into your brain and the film would just come out. That's that type of filmmaker, and he goes, that's more of the Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas type of filmmaker, which but I went up to him and asked him about Return to Oz. I said, have you ever thought about getting back into directing and doing anything like that again? And he just kind of looked at me and he just went, I don't know, we'll see. And I said, well, what about working with Coppola or Lucas or any of these people that you kind of came up with? Did you ever work with them? He goes, I don't know, we'll see. and he just had that sort of kind of. I don't know. It would be great. We'll see. And that stuck with me. Like, here's this Hollywood legend, and he just kind of is just like, I don't know. We'll see.
Well, we were having dinner one night. We were in Rome on the English Patient, and we'd finished work for the day, and we went back to our apartments where we were staying, and we stopped up at this little restaurant to have some pasta, and we were chatting away. And I said to him, I said, Walter, you got the Oscar for the sound design on Apocalypse Now. I said, you must have been completely inundated with offers to mix people's films. He said, nope, not one. I said, what, really? Not even. He said, no. He said, have you heard of the Oscar curse? I said, what's that? He said, if you're an actor, he said, it's great. It works great. He said, but if you're a technician and you win an Oscar, people will generally think, oh, we won't bother phoning up Walter for our little film. He wouldn't want to do that now that he's an Oscar winner. Or he's obviously going to charge so much money we wouldn't be able to afford him anyway, And the third one would be, well, he'd never be available because obviously everyone's phoning him up to do it. And he said that not one call, But he did mix the sound on English Patient, and then he won an Oscar for that.
he did sound mix on that English Patient as well, because I know he did the post editing on that, but I didn't know that.
He cut it, won an Oscar. It was the first film to win an Oscar that had been cut on our bid. And he cut that, got the Oscar for the picture editing and also for the sound mixing. Yeah, re-recorded.
Wow.
What year was that? 95, 96?
We were in Rome in 95. And then I think
it was 97, wasn't
97 it won, yeah.
Yeah.
At least, yeah. It won big, as you know. So, yeah. Happy days.
Yes.
Do you, just back to your journey, kind of, how did you, can you talk a little bit for our membership about how you kind of went from second assistant to first assistant and first assistant to editor? Like, how did you climb up in the business over the years?
Well, I'm one of those people, I mean, there are people that become editors, in their 30s, and I was never one of those people. I would never move up a grade until I was absolutely sure I was 100% ready, because I didn't want to screw up. I didn't want to just jump up to the next level and go, I wanted to know what I was doing. So I became a first assistant relatively quickly, even though when I was offered a first assistant, my first assistant's job, by the editor of Return to Oz, he'd taken this other. We'd finished Return to Oz, and he went on to do this other film with John Huston was in, directed by Danny Huston, little tiny 1-hour TV film. And Les Hodgson was the editor, and he said, "Okay, old boy," he said, "I'd like you to be my first assistant." And I said, "Oh, I couldn't do that, Les." I said, I'm only 23, He said, "Oh, you'll be fine." He said, "You'll be absolutely fine." I said, "Well, I'll do the second assistant's job." He said, No, my daughter's doing that." He said, "You'll be the first." So I sort of went, "Okay." He said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." And I suddenly realized I was fine. So I was a first assistant for many, many years. And I got a good name as a trustworthy, reliable person, and Walter hired me on first night, and then English Patient, and then Talented Mr. Ripley. So he'd always call me up. If ever he was in London, he'd always call me up because he knew that as a first assistant, I was reliable. And that's an editor wants a reliable, loyal assistant. Who'll just get on with it and not make a fuss. So that was all my first assistant's career. And then, of course, I was dying to do some editing. I actually was dying to actually get my hands on the scissors and actually join some shots together. And so my next sort of progression was then onto as an associate editor. My elder brother was an editor. He was editing for Kenneth Branagh in the mid-90s, and he asked me to help him out as his first assistant on Hamlet. And I went on to that, and we realized it was going to be such a big production because it was going to be 4 hours long, the film, because Branagh was shooting the entire play, Hamlet play. And so we needed a team of assistants. So what we did was we promoted me up to associate editor. So I'd be doing some cutting underneath sort of my brother's supervision. And so I started learning and sitting with Ken and learning how to take notes and, go through all that sort of thing. And then eventually the full editor's chair became mine after. It's funny, it took like 29 years before I actually had a movie on my own as the editor. And that was on Morning Glory with Roger Michell, which was fantastic fun. I mean, it was just fantastic. And then from then on, I just went from editing job to editing job after that. But it took me a long, long time because I wanted to make sure I could do it. I didn't want to screw up and not be able to do a good job.
Yeah. So when you look at this crowd here, I and I think Rob are more technician. We're a little more technical, and when you look at Eric, he's a little more filmmaker. And
I don't know if that's the impression you get when you look at me, but okay.
Whatever. When you watch his work, his body of work,
he just needs one of those newsboy caps, right?
The other thing you should know is Eric is much, much older than me, and he has shot and edited film, and I am young and virile, and I've only ever worked in video.
We'll go with that. Young.
When I watched the film, so I put together the screening here a week or so ago, and when I screened the film at home before we showed it in the theater, I was immediately brought back to, and I had a longing for videotape, which is how I started, which is a pile of tapes, a deck, and another deck, and one tape, but sifting through, and I had an immediate longing, and I missed the heft, the physical work that you were doing, the heft of all the tapes, the organizing it all, the note cards. None of this Control F, the shot where she smiled, but like note cards, or now AI, like the same one, except the girl smile, find that. I had and I haven't thought of myself as technical like that, as technical in a long time. But watching you work with the film, I really was brought back to like, I remember in points and out points and waiting for it and the pre-roll, and it would go at the same time, and then it would record and you would watch it happen, and then you would hit end, as opposed to this sort of copy paste in out down to the timeline thing. Did you, and as a person who was an assistant editor for a long time, do you think of yourself as more technical, and do you enjoy that? I really enjoy that process. Do you enjoy that process?
I mean, I did. I'm more creative than technical, actually. I mean, I've always been a frustrated creative person. I always want to get to the top and do the creative stuff. And when I became an editor, it was such a goddamn relief not to have to worry about any technical stuff anymore, because my assistants would come in and say, at 9 a.m., Dan, I've synced the dailies, Dan. I said, well, it's 9 a.m. I said, it used to take me to sort of midnight. I was really pleased to get away with that. What was amazing about, you talk about the heft and the sheer physicality of when we were making Moviola, what Walter and I had completely forgotten was that exhaustion at the end of each day. And he says in the film, we were younger then, that's why we could do it, because, I'm 62 now, and we shot it a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. And I was just going home absolutely exhausted, because just physical side of it, I wondered how on earth we ever got anything edited, any film ever got made. Because when you look at it now, digitally, as you say, Mike, when you press a couple of keystrokes and you can do loads of stuff that, where just writing something on the edge of a piece of film would take, say, 5 seconds. In 5 seconds on a computer, you could probably do about 3 or 4 operations, And so I must admit, I certainly didn't miss the physicality side because it was just so exhausting. But, you do what you do at the time, don't you? And it worked. And schedules, though, on movies anyway, I think schedules are about the same as they have. They never got quicker digitally, because thinking time, you can't think quicker.
Yeah. So as somebody who came up cutting film, so I actually have a moviola downstairs here at my office. I do, yes, and I pulled this out. I had mentioned this to Mike. So this is my box from film school. You actually see the Kodak label here, and I have film cores. This was my little bag that had everything that you had there. That's how I learned how to edit on a moviola with a splicing block and some other stuff. And I have my sync beeps and I have my grease pencils and everything still from film school I've saved.
Wow.
But what struck me, it was watching is, yes, the process. And earlier that day when we did the screening, I was actually syncing dailies for a short film that I'm editing. And I told Mike, I said, it literally is just dragging things to a timeline, highlighting it, right-click, synchronize, move on to the next one, as opposed to the process you did. But yeah, I don't miss those days. But but the destructive nature of it, like Mike was talking about, even going, for those of us who did do edits on like 2 VHS decks, cutting back and forth, you made that cut. It's like that. It took forever to do it, and you were kind of, especially with the VHS decks, hoping that it worked, because if it didn't, you had to roll back and try to redo it.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder, like, how much more now that it's digital, it's so much easier. We say we have more creative freedom because it's quicker just to change things.
Right.
But I remember when I was cutting my films, I thought about each edit a lot more. I would watch it and focus, because the physical labor of going back to fix it and trying to find those single frames in my little film tin was a job and a half. So it's like, is this really going to work?
Yeah. That's right. No,
so I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you there, Eric. I mean, the application of thought going into a cut, it not only helped the cut, it helped you assemble the scene. You would you'd have a rhythm in your head of how things were going to go, and you might want to cut from a close shot to a wide shot. Now, I mean, you can do that on the Avid, and you can just do it roughly, and then you go, now it looks good, but you can never, ever do that on film, because you go backwards and forwards on the moviola, and you're getting that, and then that, and then when you committed, you had to be sure, as you say, what you were doing. And I think that sort of helped me when I started editing digitally. I still did the same thing. I still spent the same amount of time going backwards and forwards on the Avid shot before I committed to the cut, because that rhythm helped me do the rest of the scene. Otherwise, everything would just, in my head, would just be jagged, But that's also, people edit how they do. They do what they do. I mean, Walter taught me the most of all the editors that I've worked with. He taught me the most things about the science of editing, and that's when it all clicked for me. I mean, he's written this book, Suddenly Something Clicked, and for me, suddenly something clicked was when he was teaching me how to do something. He'd just say something like, we were walking down the street in Camden Town in London one day. We were working on the talent of Mr. Ripley. We just come out of Pizza Express at lunchtime, and I was going on to cut onto Hamlet as the associate editor on Hamlet. And we were walking along, and then he suddenly stopped, and he said, when you're cutting 2 shots together, and he said, I thought, here comes a really good Walter Murch tip. And I just stood there. He said, how do you know when to cut out of the shot? And I thought, well, how? He said, let it go. He said, for as long as you feel, he said, you can stand it. Let it go. He said, don't cut because he does that. And that would be a great sort of action cut too. He said, stay with it for as long as you emotionally are ready to, all right, I've had enough of this now. And and then we carried on, and then he carried on talking about whatever else he was talking about at the time. But I remember thinking, every time I used to approach an edit, I would remember that little tip, because how do you tell someone where to cut out of a shot, And just that little tip of let it go, let it happen until you, as the editor, and everyone's going to have a different rhythm. Everyone is, but let it go. Be confident, be satisfied in yourself that you're going to cut at the right place when you feel that's enough. Because no director's ever going to say, unless they're a real pain in the arse, no one's ever going to say, why did you cut there? Why didn't you cut, why didn't you go a bit further? Or why did we, I wouldn't have done that. Well, you cut it then. So
when he said in the film that action sequences have a cadence, and then he said, but dialogue sequences have a cadence, and you can also cut those exact.
Oh yeah.
I'm 50. I've been in this business 30 years, and I thought, I'll remember that. Like the next time I go in to cut a dialogue scene,
yeah.
I'll look at it differently because of that. And I've read his books and I've studied editing, and that was just a nugget that he gave that I just went, that's.
Well, the great thing about dialogue is listening to dialogue. I've always said this to my assistants. How do you cut a dialogue? I said, well, look, listen to the dialogue, listen to the rhythm of the dialogue, because there are rhythms in the dialogue. It'll tell you where's a good place. You'll hear the rhythm. I said, treat it like you're drumming. Da 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 da. Somebody says something. As soon as they hear the rhythm of it, and try and think of it rhythmically, and those rhythms are the places to find your cuts. And dialogue's got this, as you say, full of those things. And I always found
sometimes the opposite of that, which is not on. If you want it to be awkward, if you want it to feel, if you want it to feel unsettled, Napoleon Dynamite, like a little early, a little late.
That's
like,
right.
this is really, I feel awkward.
That's right.
It's really. I didn't used to think in the beginning I wanted to be a cameraman, and I didn't think much of editing. And the more I've got, this is a long time ago, but getting into editing, you really have a lot of power. How long somebody sees something is a lot of power.
Oh, you do. I mean, it is the classic sort of, you are completely it's the only time I think people enjoy being manipulated is when they watch a movie, because, if you manipulate someone in a relationship, they'll, have your ass and they'll say, get the hell out of here, but they'll happily sit in the cinema and go, oh God, or whatever, or cry, and that's down to the editor's choice of where to put the scissors in, and I remember the other good thing I used to do, I remember on, I've done this a lot. I always do this on Avid. I use this time warp effect, and it was when I was working with Walter on First Night, and Sean Connery was playing King Arthur, and Jerry Zucker was the director, and I was so excited to be working with the guy who made Airplane. But First Night wasn't a comedy. It wasn't meant to be a comedy.
The costumes were pure comedy. Let's go with that.
But I remember they used to shoot close-ups. They'd have often 5 cameras at a time, and 5 movie cameras, a lot of money. Doing full magazines of close-ups of Sean Connery listening and reacting. So the other actor would be off screen and he'd just be listening. And one of the cameras was always running like 50 frames. I remember thinking, wow, that's a lot of film just on a reaction. But what I found was that if you slow-mo a shot of somebody listening, it gives its scene an intensity that if it was you just cut in a piece of 24 frames a second or 25 frames or whatever it is now, I don't know what it is now, but it has a more intense effect. And I would always do this whenever I'd want to get a really strong reaction of somebody listening intently to something. I'd slow the reaction down, and it did something to the muscles in the face, and it's so subtle, but it always seemed to work. And directors would say to me, wow, I don't remember him doing that on the day. I said, well, he did. I said, but at double the speed.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So Dan, something that struck me watching the film was the lengths that you have to go to keep everything organized. Yeah. And so and combining that with the destructive nature of 35 millimeter film editing, We've heard about when things went right. I want to hear a story about when things went wrong. Some snafu. You've been doing this for 30 years. I'm sure somewhere in there's a fantastic story about how something either fell apart or got misplaced or the wrong frames ended up in the finished product or some craziness like that. Do you have anything for us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, you always try and sort of cover up your mistakes if you can. I mean, the worst thing in a film editing was losing shots because, there'd be these trims, hundreds and hundreds of trims in bins hanging on hooks, and they'd easily drop into the bin, and then the editor say, well, if you're working with an editor who was actually impatient, and they'd ask the stuff, where is it? And if you couldn't find it, that would be really embarrassing. And if you lost any of the little tiny single frames that Eric was talking about earlier, if you didn't decide to cut in the right place, and you get these, I can't remember we had a Smitchies, I think Walter calls them, Smitchies. And we have a little 400-foot film can on our desk with these tiny little single frames. And where's that frame? Oh, God. No, but one of the worst things I did, I remember, in terms of complete and utter, almost soiling my trousers time, was I was working on this TV show, and it was a TV show about soccer, English football over here. And one of the actors was playing for Barcelona, and they shot all this stuff. And somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we had a helicopter shot of the stadium, just to give it a bit of scale? So this was months and months after they finished shooting. So they said, right, who in the English Football League wears yellow shirts? Somebody said, oh, Watford Football Club do. Okay, when are Watford playing? Next Saturday. Okay, great. Let's hire a helicopter and a film crew, go up. And I was getting a bit nervous about this because it had to go to the broadcasters in about 5 days' time. It was like a ridiculous last-minute decision to put this shot in. So they went out on the Saturday, they filmed it. They said to me, it'll be at Shepperton Studios reception down the Rushes, first thing in the morning. Sync them up if there, or if there was any. I think there was some sound, but it'd all be helicopter sound anyway. But he said, sync it up and give it to the editor, and he'll cut it into the. So I did. Went down to the studio, saw this can of film with lots of black camera tape all the way around. I thought they don't normally put dailies in a tin with black tape around it. So I undid the tape. Opened it.
No.
Black bag inside.
No.
They're really conscientious, these guys, putting it in a black bag. And of course, I thought, oh, shit. Who is it? And I thought, what have I done? So I phoned up the production company, and they said, I said, there's some film. I said, yeah. I said, can you send it to the lab? It's got to be processed. So anyway, I sent it off to the lab, and I didn't sleep all night. And I woke up at like 5 a.m. and I called up the lab contact. I said, Ian, I said, it's Dan Farrell. Hello, mate. Who opened the tin?
Oh no!
I said, what's happening? He said, it's fogged down both sides. I said, what, the whole thing? He said, the whole thing is fogged down both sides. So I said, okay, well, send over the print. So I went into work, and I told the editor what I'd done, and he said, he called me an idiot or whatever. But luckily, because the shot was a helicopter shot, and it was a really wide shot, we managed to zoom in and get rid of the fog, and then they cut the shot in. So I had my arse saved. That was so bloody scary,
Oh man! Thanks for that, Dan. Oh boy.
So Dan, at the screening the other day, I really wanted to. You were my guy. So I saw Walter be interviewed for this at the LA Final Cut Pro Users Group.
Yeah.
And I had talked to Howard, and I knew you were going to be a firecracker, and you were. So at the screening, we put up your picture, and we put up a little QR code and people could scan it and ask a question. And the entertaining story here is that the picture that we used is the picture of you and Walter together. And I fed it into ChatGPT and I said, just leave me the guy on the left. So Walter's photoshopped out. But anyway, we did have a couple of people submit a question, and I do have a question.
I've got my Moviola shirt on that I was wearing in the film. So
yes, you do. Yes, you do. That's the same guy. People will know.
The same guy, yeah.
Dave Schweitzer, editor local here, says, I'm struck by how hands-on the process was with running the picture and the sound reels from one cotton bin through the moviola into the other bin on the other side, it all pouring into a pile. Are fingerprints and scratches a concern for subsequent viewings of the edit, and what extra steps would be taken during final assembly before it goes out for duplication to keep the film clean and fingerprint-free?
Good. Yeah, well, it's a very good question. Phil, it did get scratched. I mean, there was no way it could not get scratched. You had to handle it as carefully as you could. A lot of time, editors would wear one white glove when they were holding it for going through the moviola gate. They'd hold it with a white glove, and then that would just pick up any bits of fluff and dust and things on the glove. So, but there was always a worry that even holding a glove around a piece of celluloid with any dirt on it, if you press too hard, it could scratch the cell or the emulsion side of the film. So you would always have scratches, but you would clean it. I mean, there was an absolute, it's probably illegal now, some terrible CFC spray called Inhibisol film cleaner. And you'd spray it onto a Selvit cloth, and the fumes would just knock you for six. And then you would hold it, a very wet cloth, as you were rewinding it through, and then that would, you'd see a load of black on the cloth afterwards, and then that would take off surface dirt, but not scratches. So as the film went on over the many, many months of editing, it would get more and more scratched. On Return to Oz, what we did was, when it went out for a preview in Los Angeles, we'd been editing for so many months, Walter decided that we needed a clean copy of the cut. So I went through the entire cut, reel by reel. I think there were 12 reels, and ordered every single shot again from the lab as a new shot. All those shots came into me in the editing room. I then had to work out where my gate mark had been on the original rush print of that and replicate it on the new shot. Then I'd have to number it on the numbering machine, and then break all the shots down individually, and then put up the cut, and then replace each shot, making sure all the numbers lined up. So we ended up with a clear. It took, I mean, it must have taken about 3 or 4 weeks to do this. Wow. You know, and you can hit Apple C and copy something, or Apple D on Avid, and you duplicate it. So yeah, you couldn't avoid scratches.
Wow.
Yeah,
I'd never thought about that process before. Pre-digital. When if you had to do test screenings, somebody would have to because you're just working with, I'm assuming, like a work print basically.
That's it.
And you probably have to go back and assemble something, because you can't show the work print, and you don't want to cut an egg, own egg at that point, because wow, what a job just to put together a test.
It was unbelievable, because in a way what I did was I did like a neg cut, but it was all on positive. So it was like a pos cut for the entire film. Right. But every single shot had to be prepared and coded exactly the same as the original had been done a year ago. So it took a long time.
Wait, so as a guy who's never done this, can you explain? I thought that the stuff you were cutting was the stuff that came out of the camera and had been developed. Is it a print that you're cutting with?
Yeah, it's what we call a rush print or first light print. But they send the process exposed negative to the lab. They process it and make a print from the negative. They send that print to you in the editing room, and that's what you cut.
Is the one that you're working with on the Moviola a positive copy or a negative copy?
It's a positive.
And is that what shows in the movie theater? Is another positive copy?
It's an exact replication of what you see in the movie theater. Yeah.
Okay.
But on Hamlet, that was shot on 65mm neg for a 70mm print, and we got 35mm reduction prints from the 65mm neg. and that was a bit of a technical jujitsu that we had to do. But because when we were editing Hamlet on 35mm, it was eventually going to be neg cut on 70mm. So we 70mm is much bigger than 35, so we couldn't make our reels too long on 35mm. Otherwise, when we sent it up to the neg cutters, they wouldn't. If it had been too big, they wouldn't be able to neg cut the 70mm reels. So things like that. I mean, there was so much more that you had to know about lab techniques. You had to know about stocks and reversals and interpositives and internegatives and all that stuff, which I've completely forgotten about now because I haven't thought about that for about 25 years. But you had to know all about that as an assistant, and you just picked it up.
I think it's funny that you talk about that. Yeah, you did need to know a lot more about the film stocks and the lab side and all that stuff. And for me, I think that a lot of that has transitioned over into now knowing you have to be sort of an IT expert. You have to be able to. I work with so many editors who work on their own, and it's like, look, and they'll say, well, I don't know what Windows is doing, or I don't know what my Mac is doing. It's like, you need to know that. If you don't have IT behind you and you're just an editor working out of your own shop, all that stuff that you had to know back in the day with film, now you have to know about computers to maintain your system so that when something goes wrong, you know how to fix it, as well as all the other, knowing about codecs and knowing about time code and knowing, all that stuff. It's just, we've just traded the information that we have to know to sort of keep the pipes going.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think film stocks and lab stuff was the metadata of its day.
Yep.
I still feel that's less frustrating than, Premiere updated and now everything's crashing.
Yeah.
That's a bummer when that happens.
I added Dan on LinkedIn a month or so ago to ask him if he'd be on this Q&A, and he graciously accepted. I will say that I now follow Dan on LinkedIn, and he's as humorous there as he is here. Dan, I wanted to know if you would tell us about slow track voice.
Ah, yes, the slow track voice. Yeah. Well, this was I think I first did this when I was working on Empire of the Sun, and Michael Kahn, who was editing Empire of the Sun, he wasn't a big fan of mine, I have to say. He found me really irritating, and I don't think he thought I was any good, but he did find this. Tape. I could speak like a slow tape recorder, and he told Steven Spielberg. And one evening, we were running rushes for Mr. Spielberg in our villa in Spain on the Chem, and I was lacing up, in front of Steve and everything, and he said, "Okay, I hear you do this amazing slow track voice," and I went, "What?" He said, and then Mike Kahn said, "Go on, do your slow track. Do your slow track." And I was thinking, okay. So I went, and he was like, This is great. I'm gonna get a camera in here, and we're gonna film the screen of the Chem, and I'm gonna run some film on the screen, and the camera's gonna pan around. You're gonna hear this slow track, and it's gonna be you in the background doing it. It's gonna be great." I was going, what a great idea! Anyway, he never did it because obviously he was far too busy. Yeah, but that's my slow track there, Mike. Or go, or you should go.
Well, Dan Farrell, we enjoyed the movie, and we enjoyed learning about the process, and we sure enjoyed talking with you. I just wanted to say
Likewise.
Thank you for being here with us today, and
It's been fun.
We just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dan. This was great.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
All right, and there we go. Thank you, Dan, and we will see you at the next Media Pros Premier Pro User Group meeting.
Not off.
Not Dan.